What you just heard are not sound effects. They are excerpts from official case files stored here in the Nightmare Log. Each one represents a breach in our understanding of reality, a moment where the documented and the impossible collided. Tonight, we are opening files related to a chilling phenomenon. Individuals who, for reasons unknown, faked their own deaths. These 7 cases have been cross-referenced with police reports, eyewitness testimony, and, in some instances, evidence that was never meant to be seen by the public. What you are about to hear is a presentation of the facts as we have found them. Before we begin, ensure you are subscribed to the Nightmare Log and have notifications activated. What we uncover here is not for the faint of heart, and you won't want to miss what we discover next. Case File NML-01, The Vanishing Journalist. It was the 3rd of February, 2012, when the disappearance of renowned investigative journalist Sarah Coleman was first reported. Sarah, a 35-year-old writer for a major news outlet in New York City, had been following a story about illegal organ trafficking. She was last seen leaving her apartment on the Upper East Side, her face determined as she headed toward her car with a notepad in hand. She never arrived at the office. The case quickly gained public attention, and within 48 hours, the police issued a missing person report. Her family, colleagues, and friends were all in shock. No one knew where she had gone, or why she hadn't reached out. But what everyone failed to notice at first was a series of increasingly strange details buried in the investigation. It wasn't until weeks later that investigators received an anonymous tip. The message, sent from an encrypted email address, contained a single line: "Sarah Coleman is alive. She's somewhere you won't find her." It was unsettling, and the police dismissed it at first as a hoax. But as the days passed, new evidence surfaced that raised suspicions. Her car had been found near a small, abandoned warehouse in Queens, not far from the city. Inside the vehicle, Sarah's belongings were scattered: a torn-up copy of her article on organ trafficking, her phone with a cracked screen, and an old camera she often used for field work. Yet, there were no signs of a struggle, and the warehouse appeared untouched. Sarah had simply vanished, but the absence of a crime scene raised more questions than answers. As the investigation continued, authorities began to receive conflicting reports. Some claimed to have seen Sarah in public, but they were always vague, always a fleeting moment in a crowd, too short to confirm anything solid. A single police officer, upon reviewing footage from a nearby security camera, swore he saw her in the background of a street in Brooklyn, wearing a hat and sunglasses. But when questioned, he couldn't remember exactly what time he'd seen her. Weeks turned into months, and the pressure mounted on investigators. No one knew where Sarah was, but the public began to suspect foul play. Some assumed she had been murdered for getting too close to exposing dangerous criminals. It was during this time that Sarah's colleagues began to notice discrepancies in her personal records. The most unsettling discovery? Her personal bank account had been accessed multiple times after her disappearance. The withdrawals were small, just enough to avoid drawing attention. But they raised a terrifying question. Could Sarah have staged her own death? The horrifying truth came to light a year later, when a routine search of an abandoned building in upstate New York led investigators to a sealed-off room. Inside, they found Sarah, but not in the way they expected. Her hair was graying, her face gaunt, and she had aged significantly. She had been living in isolation, with no contact from the outside world. But it wasn't the disheveled woman who shocked the investigators. It was the files scattered around the room. a detailed ledger chronicling everything from her bank transactions to a meticulously planned set of false death certificates. Sarah Coleman had orchestrated her own disappearance. She had staged her death to escape the dangerous people she had been investigating. The organ traffickers she had been writing about were far more powerful than anyone realized. She had faked her death, using a mix of forged documents and fabricated evidence to slip away and live in hiding. But the psychological toll of living as a ghost had taken its toll on her mind. After Sarah's rescue, she was placed under protective custody, though the damage to her psyche was irreversible. She was unable to provide a coherent explanation for why she had gone to such lengths. Despite the official report marking her death as a disappearance, with no signs of foul play, the nightmare log has classified this as a case of self-inflicted psychological breakdown. Sarah's actions were more than an attempt to escape danger. They were a complete disavowal of her former life. The official report lists the cause of Sarah Coleman's death as an unsolved disappearance. The nightmare log has classified it as a containment breach. The entity referred to as the vanishing journalist remains unaccounted for. The reason behind her decision to fake her death remains a mystery, though the records suggest she was deeply traumatized by her work. But Sarah Coleman is not the only one who has attempted to escape into the shadows. Our next case takes us to a small town in the Midwest, where a man vanished from his life, only to return years later with a story that no one was prepared for. Case File NML 02, The Silent Return of James Barrow. James Barrow was a 42-year-old mechanic living in the quiet town of Edgewater, Wisconsin. He was known for his hard work and dependable service at his local garage, always helping out friends and neighbors. His life seemed ordinary until the morning of January 12, 2008. That day, James was found to be missing. His truck was parked outside his house, the doors left wide open. His family searched for days, but there were no signs of foul play. No ransom calls. No strange footprints. James Barrow had simply vanished. For weeks, investigators combed through the area, searching nearby woods, ponds, and even questioning anyone who might have seen something unusual. But nothing turned up. The police report was filed with no leads, and, after several months, the case went cold. His wife, devastated by the loss, eventually moved away with their children, and James Barrow was presumed dead. Years later, in 2014, a letter arrived at the Edgewater Police Department. The letter contained only a single sentence: "I'm coming home." It was postmarked from a remote location in northern Canada, and there was no return address. It was signed with a name, James Barrow. At first, authorities thought it was a prank, but when James reappeared in the town 2 weeks later, there was no denying that it was truly him. He looked the same, but there was something different about him. He was quiet, withdrawn, and spoke little about his time away. The authorities were baffled, but the locals were even more disturbed. James' return should have been a relief, but it only fueled suspicion. He kept to himself and avoided contact with anyone from his past. When questioned, he gave vague answers. "I was lost," he said. "I needed to get away." But no one could explain how he had managed to survive alone for 6 years, especially in such a harsh, unforgiving environment like the Canadian wilderness. What was more troubling were the details James would occasionally mention in passing. He spoke about hearing voices in the woods, of strange lights in the sky, and something, a presence, following him. Each time he mentioned these things, his voice would falter. As time went on, the police dug deeper into his disappearance. James' bank accounts had remained untouched during his absence, and his records were clean. There were no transactions, no phone calls, no emails. It was as if he had completely severed ties with his past life, at least officially. In 2016, after undergoing psychological evaluations, James finally broke his silence. He confessed to faking his death. He had been coerced by a secretive organization that threatened his family if he didn't comply. They gave him a new identity and placed him in hiding. But the real horror came when he began to describe what he had experienced during those years. James spoke of being watched, of being placed in a controlled environment where he was monitored constantly. He believed he had been part of a government experiment designed to test the limits of human endurance and fear. There were strange rituals, whispers in the night, and ever-present shadows that seemed to follow him no matter where he went. The most terrifying part? James believed he was marked by something unnatural, something that had followed him back. James was never fully believed. Though he underwent extensive interviews and the police found no concrete evidence of his claims, the locals could sense the unease in his eyes. They could feel that he wasn't telling them everything. His return was shrouded in mystery, and his silence spoke volumes. The official report listed his disappearance as a case of voluntary escape, with no further explanation. The nightmare log, however, has classified this as a potential containment breach involving an entity that remains undetected to this day. The truth behind James Barrow's disappearance is buried in the void of his own mind. The official report lists the case as a disappearance, with James Barrow returning under mysterious circumstances. The nightmare log has classified it as a containment breach. James' statements point to an unverified source of fear, something that may still be watching. The reason for his fake death remains unclear, but the possibility of an unknown entity manipulating his actions is highly probable. But the oddities of self-inflicted death fakes are not confined to mere disappearances. Our next case brings us to a family who sought to escape a past that would never let go. Case File NML 03, The Silent Witness. On the night of May 17, 2010, in a small suburban neighborhood just outside Chicago, 29-year-old Peter Larson, a former high school teacher, was reported dead. His body was discovered in his apartment, lying motionless on the living room floor. The cause of death was ruled as a heart attack, a sudden, unforeseen tragedy that seemed to have come without warning. The apartment was undisturbed. Everything appeared to be in its rightful place. His family mourned, and his friends quietly filed through the grief process. However, one crucial detail was overlooked by the authorities: Peter Larson's obituary. In his will, Peter left behind an unusual note: "I am sorry for the pain I have caused. The truth must stay hidden. There is no escape from it." His family thought it was a simple farewell note, perhaps written in the heat of a crisis, but they didn't know the depths of Peter's secret. His disappearance from his own life, a carefully orchestrated vanishing act, would soon be uncovered. 6 months after his death, a chilling message arrived at the police department: Peter Larson never died. He's out there, watching you. The anonymous letter had a date and time attached: May 17th, the night of his supposed death. It was signed with a peculiar symbol, an intricate design that resembled an ancient sigil. Though the police assumed it was just another prank, the timing of the message was disturbing. In the months that followed, a series of strange sightings began to occur. Several individuals who had known Peter reported seeing him in the most unlikely places: grocery stores, gas stations, and even outside of his old apartment. The reports came from people who would have no reason to lie. These were close friends, co-workers, and family members, all swearing that they had seen Peter alive. It wasn't a mistake. They knew him well enough to recognize him. The authorities continued to investigate, though most of the sightings were vague or inconclusive. The apartment complex where Peter had lived remained under surveillance, but the building had been sold shortly after his death, and all leads seemed to go cold. Peter's family, specifically his younger brother, Sam, began receiving cryptic messages. At first, it was harmless: a few strange phone calls, muffled whispers through the receiver, and an occasional letter addressed only to Sam Larson. "You know too much." Then one evening, Sam found a letter in his mailbox, marked with the same sigil from the initial letter sent to the police. The contents were chilling. "I'm still here. You're getting too close." Sam felt a growing unease. He had always known his brother to be secretive, but this level of deception? It was far beyond anything he could have ever imagined. In October of 2011, a breakthrough came when an old security camera from the building's parking garage was uncovered. The footage, taken on the night of May 17th, showed Peter Larson walking out of his apartment with a heavy duffel bag. But he didn't walk out like a man fleeing from a crime scene. No, he was calm, collected. He glanced over his shoulder, almost to check if anyone was watching him, and left the building without a trace. The subsequent investigation revealed that Peter Larson had staged his own death with the help of a group of individuals he had met online. Individuals connected to underground organizations dealing with legal loopholes and the criminal underworld. It turned out that Peter had become involved with a dangerous syndicate that specialized in orchestrating disappearances for those who wanted to start a new life, without leaving a trace. Peter had faked his own death to escape a mounting debt and the dangerous people after him. He had used his background as a teacher to carefully craft an elaborate ruse involving medical records, false police reports, and a staged scene that would suggest an accidental death. Peter was never found. His family eventually moved on with their lives, though Sam Larson never stopped searching. He was convinced that his brother was still out there, somewhere. The police report listed Peter's death as natural causes, but the circumstances surrounding his disappearance and the elaborate ruse pointed to a calculated effort to escape from the law. The Nightmare Log has classified this case as a containment breach. While Peter Larson may have died in the eyes of the world, the truth was far more complex. His disappearance was a meticulously planned self-erasure, but the mark he left behind will never be fully erased from the minds of those who knew him. The official report lists the cause of death as a natural heart attack. The Nightmare Log has classified it as a containment breach. The sigil left behind suggests there may have been a deeper, more sinister organization involved, and Peter Larson's true fate remains unknown. But the case of Peter Larson is not the only instance where people have faked their own deaths. Our next story takes us to a small, isolated island where a family's secret, hidden for decades, was about to be unearthed. Case File NML 04, The Island Fugitive. In 1987, The small island community of Nogueira, off the coast of Brazil, was shaken by the sudden disappearance of a prominent family. The Silva family, longtime residents of the island, were known for their wealth, their private estate, and their social influence. The patriarch, Eduardo Silva, was a well-respected businessman, while his wife, Beatriz, was known for her philanthropic work. Their children, Rosa and Gabriel, were both successful in their respective fields, Rosa in medicine and Gabriel in law. One night, the family's estate was found in disarray. Furniture overturned, broken windows, and signs of a hasty departure. Eduardo, Beatriz, Rosa, and Gabriel were gone. There were no signs of struggle, but the islanders were puzzled. The police were called, and an investigation began. Soon, the authorities concluded that the Silvas had been victims of a robbery gone wrong, possibly followed by their forced departure. Yet, the official report left a critical detail unexplained. Their sudden disappearance appeared to be too well executed. Weeks passed with no further leads, and the case seemed to be slipping into obscurity. However, an anonymous tip was received by the local police station in 1988. The letter, simply addressed to the chief of police, contained a startling claim. The Silvas are alive. They are living under new identities in Europe. They faked their deaths to escape their past. The letter was dismissed by the authorities as a hoax, but it planted a seed of doubt in the minds of investigators. The Silvas had vanished without a trace. No bodies were found, no ransom demands made, and no evidence suggesting a forced disappearance. The more the police delved into their financial records, the more suspicious it became. As investigators began to follow the money trail, they discovered large transfers made to various accounts across Europe, accounts linked to shell companies. But the real breakthrough came when an old neighbor of the Silvas, a retired dock worker, recalled an incident that seemed entirely out of place. A few days before the family's disappearance, he had seen Eduardo Silva speaking to a man he didn't recognize at the docks. The man had been wearing a dark coat, though it was a warm day, and he had an unusually thick accent. The dock worker had also overheard fragments of their conversation: passport, escape, and "I'll be waiting at the port." The investigators' attention was now fully focused on the possibility that the Silva family had orchestrated their own disappearance. But why? The shocking truth came in 1990 when authorities in Lisbon, Portugal, uncovered a set of false documents linked to the Silva family. Eduardo, Beatriz, Rosa, and Gabriel had not been victims. They had faked their deaths to escape a series of criminal investigations and financial scandals that had threatened to destroy them. Eduardo had been deeply involved in illegal arms dealing, money laundering, and underworld connections. His wealth had come at a significant cost, and the family's carefully crafted public image was a facade to cover their growing list of illicit activities. In the final stages of their disappearance, the Silva family had staged a violent robbery to throw off suspicion. They used their extensive resources to create the perfect cover story. Their death had been made to look like a tragic accident, and they were granted new identities under the protection of unknown entities in Europe. When the authorities in Brazil finally caught wind of the Silva family's survival, they could do little to arrest them. The family was protected by international law and their newly forged identities. Eduardo, Beatriz, Rosa, and Gabriel Silva were last seen in Switzerland, where they continued their lavish lifestyle beyond the reach of the law. The case was quietly closed, but whispers persisted. The Nightmare Log has classified the Silva family's disappearance as an elaborate containment breach. Their actions remain shrouded in secrecy, and the methods they used to vanish are unknown. The official report lists the disappearance of the Silva family as an unsolved case of unknown motives. The Nightmare Log has classified it as a containment breach. The Silva's true identities are believed to have been hidden in plain sight, living among us under assumed names. But even families like the Silvas are not beyond the reach of their past. Our next case takes us to a man who attempted to leave it all behind, and the terrifying consequences he never anticipated. Case File NML 05, The Fugitive Professor. Dr. Leonard Hall was a respected professor of neuroscience at the prestigious Westbrook University in Boston. At 48, he was a man of great academic renown, having authored several influential papers on brain function and psychological disorders. His career had flourished over the years, his reputation sterling, his lectures well-attended, and his research often cited. But in the summer of 2017, everything changed. Dr. Hall, who had been known for his meticulous nature and unshakable calm, was reported missing. His office, once full of academic journals and research materials, was found abandoned. His office chair was overturned, his computer left running with the screensaver blinking, and his notes scattered across the floor. What caught the attention of the police, however, was a cryptic message written in a scrawl on his whiteboard. "They're coming. I have to disappear. Tell them the truth when you find me." The message was a jarring contradiction to the man who had always presented himself as a controlled, rational academic. His colleagues, at first, assumed it was a prank, but soon the truth became undeniable. Dr. Hall had vanished, and he had left behind a trail that led directly to his carefully constructed self-erasure. It wasn't until 2 weeks after Dr. Hall's disappearance that a breakthrough came. An anonymous letter arrived at the university's administration office. The letter simply read, "I didn't die, but I faked it. I had to. They know what I've discovered. You can't hide the truth forever." The signature at the bottom was a symbol, an abstract drawing that, upon investigation, matched an obscure neurological pattern Dr. Hall had once referenced in one of his lectures, a pattern theorized to be linked to profound psychological shifts. At first, the authorities dismissed it as a hoax, but as they dug deeper, they found disturbing records hidden within Dr. Hall's research. It appeared that over the last few months, he had been investigating a controversial theory involving mind control, specifically, a way to manipulate brain chemistry to erase one's identity entirely. The theory suggested that by inducing a specific state of neural disassociation, a person could effectively reprogram themselves and become someone else, mentally and physically. Dr. Hall's obsession with this theory had led him to conduct highly classified experiments with his own brain. His colleagues had been unaware of the depths to which he had gone in his research, and as the investigation unfolded, the suspicion grew. Had Dr. Hall really faked his own death, or had he been consumed by his own experiment? In the months following his disappearance, rumors began to spread. People in Boston began reporting seeing someone resembling Dr. Hall, but this new figure was never quite right. Witnesses spoke of a man with a blank look in his eyes, someone who seemed disconnected from the world around him. It wasn't Dr. Hall's disappearance that unsettled people the most. It was the fact that no one could find the man who had once been so familiar to them. despite all the signs pointing to his survival. The deeper the police dug, the stranger the discoveries became. They found that Dr. Hall's personal finances had been manipulated, his identity erased in a series of clandestine transactions. He had used his extensive knowledge of neuroscience to perform a form of self-hypnosis, attempting to sever his ties to his past and rebuild himself under a new identity. But the experiment came at a terrible cost. According to the notes left behind in his office, Dr. Hall had begun to experience severe memory gaps and lapses in his own sense of self. His once clear mind was now consumed by the fear that something had taken over him, something that had erased the core of who he was. In early 2019, a breakthrough came when a psychologist from a nearby clinic reached out with a chilling confession. The psychologist revealed that a man matching Dr. Hall's description had been seeking treatment at her office under a new name, John Michaels. He claimed to have no memory of his previous life, and though he was an intelligent and well-spoken man, his mind was fractured. He didn't remember who he had been or how he had gotten there. The psychologist had been treating him for a form of dissociative amnesia, but something didn't add up. Dr. Hall had implanted his own memories with false ones, but in doing so, had broken his mind. The memory erasure had worked, but only partially. Dr. Hall had faked his own death and altered his identity, but in doing so, had unwittingly created a broken version of himself, unable to piece together the truth of his past. Dr. Hall was eventually found, but not as the man he had once been. He was a shattered version of himself, his brilliant mind dulled by the very experiment he had conducted. His colleagues and family were left to wonder, was this the price of seeking to control the mind? Was it possible to truly escape one's past? Or had Dr. Hall simply destroyed his own existence in the process? The official report listed Dr. Hall as a victim of extreme mental instability, with no clear explanation of his actions. The nightmare log, however, has classified it as a containment breach, an experiment gone wrong. The truth about Dr. Hall's disappearance and his experiments into mind control is buried deep within the recesses of his mind, and the damage caused by his quest to escape his past remains a cautionary tale about the limits of human psychology. The official report lists the case as a mental breakdown, with Dr. Hall being treated for dissociative amnesia. The nightmare log has classified it as a containment breach. Dr. Hall's work on self-identity manipulation remains unexplained, and the full scope of his experiment is still unknown. But mind control is not the only thing that can erase a person's identity. Our next case takes us to a man who faked his death in order to escape his own demons, only to be hunted by the very thing he tried to leave behind. Case File NML 06, The Ghost of Edward Myers. Edward Myers was an ordinary man by most standards. At 38, he lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment in Sacramento, California. He worked as a computer analyst for a tech firm, a quiet man who preferred the comfort of his routines over the chaos of social gatherings. To his friends, he was dependable but unremarkable, someone who kept to himself, never sharing much about his past. However, his past was far darker than anyone could have imagined. In 2011, Edward vanished without a trace. His apartment was left in disarray, an overturned chair, a table full of unfinished paperwork, and his computer still logged into his work email. His colleagues initially thought he had taken an impromptu leave of absence, but after several days of not hearing from him, the company filed a missing person report. The police, after investigating, found no signs of forced entry or foul play, only the inexplicable absence of Edward Myers. The mystery deepened when it was revealed that Edward had recently made large withdrawals from his bank account, enough to suggest he was planning to leave. But to where? And why? No one could answer these questions, and the case quickly became another unsolved disappearance. A year later, a shocking letter arrived at the Sacramento Police Department. The letter, signed only with the name Edward, read, "I faked my death to escape, but they found me. They never stopped looking." Attached to the letter was a photo of Edward, taken in what appeared to be a remote area, standing next to a man who was unidentifiable. The note was postmarked from a small town in Arizona, but there was no further explanation. The police were initially skeptical, dismissing the letter as a hoax. But when they traced the postmark, it led them to a series of hidden locations where Edward had been known to stay. Each place was increasingly isolated. An abandoned cabin, a rundown motel, and finally, a small, nondescript trailer in the Arizona desert. As the investigation progressed, strange reports began to surface. Several individuals claimed to have seen Edward Myers in various places, but they all described him as being different. He no longer resembled the quiet man who had vanished. His eyes were hollow, his movements stiff and unnatural. Some witnesses described hearing whispers or seeing fleeting shadows whenever he appeared. The deeper the police dug, the more they uncovered about Edward's past. It seemed that he had been involved in a series of shady dealings that he had tried to escape. But there was something more, a growing fear that Edward had not just faked his death, but had been part of something far darker, something that continued to haunt him long after he had vanished. In 2013, the final breakthrough came when a local sheriff in Arizona discovered a hidden set of journals belonging to Edward Myers. The journals chronicled his descent into madness after faking his death. They revealed that he had been haunted by figures he called watchers, silent, shadowy figures who followed him no matter where he went. Edward's notes described a series of inexplicable events, like hearing whispers through his walls and feeling like he was constantly being observed. He believed he had attracted something sinister, something that was now hunting him. Edward's final entry read, "I thought I could escape them, but they are real. They have found me. I can't escape." Edward was never found again. His last known location was a small, dilapidated house in the desert, but it was empty when authorities arrived. The only traces left behind were his journals and a few cryptic symbols drawn on the walls. The official report claimed that Edward had likely died in the desert, possibly from exposure, but there was no evidence to support this conclusion. The Nightmare Log has classified this as a containment breach. It is unclear whether Edward's fake death was his attempt to escape a criminal past or if something more sinister followed him into his new life. His journals suggest a man trapped by his own creation, unable to escape from forces beyond his control. The official report lists the case as an unresolved disappearance, with the possibility of Edward Myers perishing in the desert. The Nightmare Log has classified it as a containment breach. Edward's final words suggest something far darker was at play, and the truth of his disappearance remains an unsolved mystery. But what happens when the very thing you try to escape becomes your permanent shadow? Our next case takes us to a man who thought he could run, only to find that some monsters never let you go. Case File NML-07. The Final Escape of Robert Clay. Robert Clay was once a highly successful financial advisor in San Francisco, known for his meticulous nature and sharp instincts in handling multi-million-dollar portfolios. At 41, he was the picture of success, a respected figure in the city's elite circles. By all appearances, Robert had everything: a flourishing career, a beautiful home in a gated community, and a pristine reputation. But beneath the surface, Robert was hiding something, a dangerous secret that would eventually cost him everything. In 2015, Robert disappeared. His family reported him missing after not hearing from him for several days, and his colleagues at the firm were equally baffled. The last anyone had heard from him was on a Monday morning, when he had shown up for a meeting. His office had been left in a state of disarray, papers scattered across the desk, his phone placed gently beside his laptop, but no signs of a struggle. It was as though Robert had simply vanished, leaving behind everything he had worked for. His disappearance would quickly become one of the most baffling and unsettling cases the San Francisco Police Department had ever encountered. However, what seemed like a typical missing persons case would soon take a turn into the unexplainable. Just weeks after Robert's disappearance, an anonymous phone call was made to the police. The caller, a man with a distorted voice, whispered into the receiver, "Robert Clay is alive, and he's running." The police dismissed the call as another prank, but the information seemed to strike a chord with them. Could Robert have staged his disappearance? And if so, why? As the investigation unfolded, disturbing patterns began to emerge. Robert had been deeply involved in a series of financial dealings that, upon further investigation, turned out to be illegal. He had been laundering money for a group of dangerous individuals, hiding behind the facade of his professional life. His sudden disappearance was now being seen as more than just a man running from personal issues. It was a calculated move to escape both the law and the criminal syndicate he had gotten entangled with. But as investigators dug deeper into his finances, something even more chilling was uncovered. Robert had transferred vast sums of money to an unknown offshore account just days before his disappearance. Money that could have provided him with the means to escape without a trace. Months went by with no new leads, but the case took an unexpected turn when a local journalist, who had been investigating Robert's financial dealings, received a disturbing piece of evidence. The journalist, a man named Paul Grayson, found an old video on a secure website that seemed to show Robert Clay standing in a dimly lit room. The video was grainy, but it was unmistakably him. Robert's face was pale and gaunt, and he looked like a man on the run. In the video, Robert spoke in a low, almost whispered voice. "I had no choice. They would have killed me if I didn't disappear. They're still looking for me." The video was time-stamped just days after Robert had supposedly vanished, casting further doubt on the assumption that he had met with foul play. It seemed that Robert had intentionally staged his own death, perhaps to escape the criminal organization that had forced him into a corner. But what had happened to him in the years since? The breakthrough came in 2020 when a tip from an anonymous source led authorities to a hidden property in a remote area of Nevada. The house, though isolated, contained a staggering number of surveillance cameras and hidden rooms, almost as if it had been designed for someone to remain under constant watch. Inside, investigators discovered a set of journals belonging to Robert, each one detailing his attempts to erase his past and live under new identities. The most chilling revelation came from his final entry, written in 2019. It read, They never stop watching. Every moment of every day, they are looking for me. But now I can't even remember who I was before this life. I am lost in my own escape." The words were chilling, a sign that Robert's efforts to disappear had come at an immense cost. His mental state had deteriorated as he lived in hiding, constantly fearing the consequences of his past. Robert Clay had not just faked his death. He had become a fugitive, hunted by forces far beyond his control. His journals described his increasing paranoia and fear that the criminal syndicate he had worked for would eventually find him, no matter how well he hid. The truth was far more harrowing. Robert's decision to fake his own death had not only erased his identity, but it had left him broken and unable to reclaim the life he had once known. Robert's last known location was a small shack on the outskirts of the Nevada desert. By the time authorities arrived, it was too late. The shack had been abandoned for months, with no trace of Robert Clay remaining. The police found his journals, his computers, and a few remaining personal belongings, but there was no sign of Robert himself. His family, who had long given up hope, were left with the haunting knowledge that Robert had never truly died. He had simply disappeared into his own mind, consumed by his escape. The criminal organization that had once hunted him was never found, and the full extent of their involvement in his life remained unknown. The official report listed Robert's death as an unsolved disappearance, with no conclusion reached. His escape was presumed to be the result of his involvement in illegal activities. But the Nightmare Log has classified this case as a containment breach. A man who, in trying to escape his past, ended up losing everything, including his very sense of self. The official report lists Robert Clay's disappearance as an unresolved case of self-imposed exile. The Nightmare Log has classified it as a containment breach. Robert's self-destructive journey into hiding may have been an attempt to flee from his past, but in doing so, he lost more than his life. He lost his identity and sanity. 7 cases. 7 lives altered beyond recognition. In each story, we see the lengths to which people will go to escape their past, to shed the identities that once defined them. But these stories remind us that there is no true escape from the consequences of our actions. The truth may be buried, but it never stays hidden forever. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Check on your neighbors. Believe survivors when they speak out. The most dangerous monsters are often the ones who look just like us. If you have a case you believe belongs in the log, describe it in the comments below. Your story could be investigated for a future entry. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. Stay vigilant. This has been a presentation from the Nightmare Log. Until next time, try to sleep.